Woohoo and welcome back. Today we're going to be working with more examples of completing the square. In our last video, I promised to show you the method for completing the square when you're not quite sure how to proceed. And for this first one, I have chosen a quadratic that actually factors really nicely. X squared minus 8x plus 7 does factor. So if someone asked you to simply solve this, you probably would want to use factoring because it will be faster. But I wanted to pick a relatively simple one to show you the method for completing the square, just so you can see how it all works. And then our second example will be a little bit more complicated to show you what to do when things get a little more complicated. So this is my method for completing the square. There are actually a few different ways to do this. So you may have learned a different way, and if you learned a different way, that way I'm sure is fine. This is just the way that I've learned to do it over the years. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take this 7, because I can see this 7, not a perfect square, and I'm going to move it over. There are some methods that leave the 7 on that side. And again, you're welcome to use whatever method makes the most sense and makes it, easiest for you. Now I'm just going to have x squared minus 8x and then equals negative 7 on the other side. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on this number right here. I'll go ahead and underline that. The negative 8, the coefficient of x. The one that would be b if you're looking at ax squared plus bx plus c. The c goes over on this side, and then we're just going to focus on the b. And I'm going to take that b, which is negative 8, and I'm going to multiply it by 1/2. And the reason for this is that in a perfect square, you might recall the middle term is 2ab. So I want to get rid of that 2. I want to just get the a and the b by themselves. So I divide by 2 or multiply by 1/2. And then I'm going to take that number that I get, and I'm going to take that number, and I'm going to square it. And that way I get a 16. At the end of this process, you should have a perfect square here. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to put it in this empty space I created by moving the 7 over to the other side. So I'm going to take that, the 16, and put it in over here. Now, of course, I can't just insert 16 into an equation because that will change the equation. So to keep it balanced, I also add it to the other side. And that way the equation stays equivalent. We've got equivalent equations, or an equation that will give us the same set of answers. Okay, so if you follow this process, this right here will be a perfect square, guaranteed. And in fact, you can go ahead and look at it and decide and say, oh, okay, there's x here from the x squared, and this is going to be a 16, so that'll give us a 4, and there's a minus in the middle. But I will make a note that this number right here will match this number, these two numbers. That will be the same one right there. So you don't even have to do the work of figuring out what kind of a perfect square it is. This number will match this number. Okay, over here, negative 7 plus 16 is a 9, which is nice because it's also a perfect square. So we see that there's something pretty magical happening. The fact that up here we could tell it would factor means that the completing the square is going to be really, really lovely. The next one we do, that'll be more interesting, more of a challenge. So remember that at this point, I have completed the square. So this is the part that we technically called completing the square. Although sometimes people call the whole thing, everything we're going to do, completing the square. But officially, now what we're going to do is we're going to solve using square roots, which is either called solve using square roots or the square root method. And that's the one where we take the square root or radical of x minus 4, the quantity squared on the left, and radical square root 9. And then we always remember, we don't want to leave out any possible answers, so we've got plus or minus 9 there. And, pardon me, remember the plus or minus, that way we've got both. Over here on the left, the radical and the square undo each other, so I get x minus 4. And over here on the right, I get plus or minus radical 9, so that's plus or minus 3. And then all I need to do now is to isolate x. So I've got x minus 4 equals plus or minus 3. Remember, that's two answers right there. I add 4 to both sides. And I'm going to end up with x equals 4 plus or minus 3. Now I can expand that and look at 4 plus 3 or 4 minus 3. And I've always been charmed by the fact that this is 4 plus or minus 3. So the plus goes here, the or goes here, and the minus goes there. So we use everything. And then we get x equals 7 or 1. Now, we can easily check the original problem, x squared minus 8x plus 7. Let me see if I've got space right here. If we want to check x equals 7, so that would be 7 squared minus 8 times 7 plus 7. Does that equal 0? And we get 49 minus 56 plus 7. Yep. Double check. That does give us 0. And when x equals 1, I've got 1 squared minus 8 times 1 plus 7. Does that equal 0? That's 1 minus 8 plus 7. That does equal 0. Woohoo! So completing the square, although it does take a lot of steps, you can learn the process, and the process will be the same every time, and it'll give you two answers even when you can't factor. You can still do it. If you just love completing the square, you could do it all the time. I'm going to make a note here that this is the square root method. It's got some other names, but that's the name I know it as. And then we've got this one, and this is how it works when we've got a relatively friendly one. So, shall we go ahead and try one that's not friendly at all? Dum, dum, dum! Now, at first, if you take a look at this, it kind of looks like it won't be that bad. It's all 3s and 6s. What could be so bad about 3s and 6s, right? Right? Yeah, exactly. Chai agrees. Chai says, yes, this is going to be easy peasy. So, the good news is, though, that the method still works even when the numbers don't turn out as well. And even when a giant cat comes to inspect the math. Hey, Chai. You're coming to help with the completing the square? I appreciate that. There you go. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Just a note, you are not required to have a cat handy to complete the square, but it does help. It certainly does help because you can be petting the cat anytime the completing the square goes a little bit sideways, right? They help to keep you focused, and they help to keep you from panicking too hard. So, there is actually one more step we're going to have to do with this one. But let me show you. I don't want to get ahead of myself. So, the first thing we do, check the constant to the other side of the equation. So I get 3x squared plus 6x equals 3. So far, so good. Now, normally we would look at this 6 and start doing stuff. However, you might have noticed that there's another difference with this one. If you get a problem where the x squared has a coefficient other than 1, so it has a number that you can see in front of it that's not 1, you Can't have that there. You've got to divide. Now for this one, I did take the easy route. This is going to divide nicely. And I can already hear you saying, but wait a minute, what if it doesn't divide? And if it doesn't divide, then you're going to have fractions. And I am happy to help you with those too. So I'm going to get x squared plus 2x equals 1, which already I hear you saying, well, that looks like it's going to be so easy. Oh my gosh, why are you doing the easy ones? And the answer is no, this one does get a little complicated. So have faith. This is going to be awful. Don't worry. I picked a yucky one. Okay, so once you've got x squared all by itself, that's when you go to the 2. And I'm going to pick the 2. And as you recall, what I do here is I'm going to take 1/2 of the 2, and that's going to give me 1. And I know, I hear you all saying, but that's so easy. Why are you picking an easy one? Well, just see, just a moment. So then we take the 1 and we square it. In this case, it's not that exciting. I know 1 squared is still 1, but watch what happens. Because now we're required to add that to both sides. So I do the x squared plus 2x, and then I add a plus 1, right? That goes there, equals, now there's already a 1 here, and then we have to add a 1 on the other side as well. So we have to add the 1 on the left and the 1 on the right. And this is where it's going to get exciting. Because this is going to give us x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 2. And now, when we have to take the square root, it's going to be a little bit yucky. But I'll show you how to deal with it. It's not going to be that hard. Just go slowly, right big. I have faith in you. Have courage. Okay, x squared plus 2x plus 1. That's x plus 1, the quantity squared. If you forget, remember, it will match this number right there. Okay, so I'm going to take radical or square root of x plus 1, the quantity squared. Square root of 2, make sure you do that plus or minus so you don't miss any of the answers. There are 2 answers there. This one becomes x plus 1, and this one becomes plus or minus radical 2. At which point, oh, you can't see. At which point you can't see. This has been such an exciting video. Okay, so now what? There's this big, ugly, scary thing over here. There's a 1 that shouldn't be on the left. What do we do? And the answer is we do exactly what we do with every other completing the square problem. We're going to go ahead and move this 1 by subtracting. And on the left, I'm going to get x, right? But on the right, I'm going to put the minus 1 first, and then the plus or minus radical 2. And believe it or not, that's our answer. Now, what if WebAssign, which it does, asks you to write them out separately? Well, then you write them out separately. There's a -1 plus radical 2, and there's a -1 minus radical 2. Now, for the purposes of this video, I want to keep it under 15 minutes, so I'm not going to show you checking these, but I am honestly happy to check this. If you'd like to see it checked, just let me know. And good luck with the rest of your completing the square. What we're going to do in the next video is we're going to complete the square one final time and then come up with a formula. And that's going to be called the quadratic formula, which you may already know. Woohoo! This is very exciting. We're on the precipice of all the excitement. So go get some snacks, hydrate a bit, maybe go look at something green, you know, get outside, focus on something far away, get your eyes off a screen, and come back and we'll do some really cool stuff. Woohoo! I believe in you. You're awesome. Math on.